You're watching Strat News Global. I'm Amitabh Brevi, and it's a pleasure to be joined from Frankfurt by Lieutenant General Ben Hodges. He's the former commanding general of the U.S. Army in Europe and the Pershing Chair of CEPA, the Center for European Policy Analysis. Thank you so much for your time, General.
Well, thank you for the privilege.
Just wanted to get your thoughts on the Quad Foreign Ministerial, the second one that took place in Tokyo. Of course, there was no joint statement. As usual, all four issued a separate statement. But your views in the light of what China is doing geostrategically around the globe, whether it's from the East China Sea to the South China Sea to the Himalayas, on the importance of the Quad and the Indo-Pacific construct?
Well, first of all, I am a longtime believer in the importance and value of alliances and regional relationships, working together, not just in the military domain, but also in the diplomatic domain, in the information domain, and in the economic domain. So, when you talk about great power competition, you need to compete in all domains. I do believe that great power competition prevents great power conflict, because when you compete in each domain, it's clear to potential adversaries that you have interests and that you're going to do something about those interests. And then I think that helps actually lower the chance of a miscalculation that maybe you're not willing to defend a particular interest. The fact that there was such a weak reaction to China's to Beijing's suppression of Hong Kong, for example, I think that raises the risk of miscalculation when Beijing sees that the West is not really going to do anything. So organizations or affiliations like the Quad are important because it demonstrates, first of all, that the United States has interest and that we are committed to the region. And the inclusion, when you think about the four countries of the Quad, the United States, India, Japan, and Australia, that's a broad construct that it's not an alliance, but it's four very important nations discussing what their interests are and how can we maintain stability and security in that region.
General Hodges, you're pointing out the reaction of China if a country or countries or partnerships or groups of partnerships don't show strength. You mentioned Hong Kong. In that term, this diamond, the Quad itself, it's not a military alliance like you're pointing out. Others try to call it Asian NATO, which it certainly isn't because India has large reservations on that. But we have seen that China has responded to anything that happens incrementally, even within the Quad, with alacrity. So that itself shows that it is not only just signaling.
Yeah, well, look, there's a reason that nations look for allies and friends, and there's a reason that potential adversaries and aggressors, like the Chinese Communist Party, do not want India and Japan and Australia and the United States to come together in any way. If the Chinese Communist Party was truly interested in prosperity for everybody in the region, was truly interested in cooperation on things like climate and freedom of navigation and free and fair trade and respect for international law, then there would not be much need for different affiliations or treaties or alliances. But obviously, that's the last thing that they want, is to see the United States, India, Australia, and Japan working together more closely. And I think the thing that the Chinese Communist Party fears is less the combined militaries. What they really fear is the combined diplomatic strength. If the four members of the Quad are able to explain and bring along other nations in the region to continue to shine the light on China's violation of international law, attacks on fishing vessels belonging to, say, Vietnam and the Philippines, for example, the continued theft of technology, the continued mistreatment of minorities, the horrible record of climate abuse, if you will. That's the last thing they want. And so this is why I think the Quad actually represents an important mechanism for shining the light on China's malfeasance.
When you come to Europe itself, General, now, I mean, of course, the National Defense Strategy of the United States, which was outlined in 2013, clearly pointing out that the long-term strategic competition is with Russia and China. Vis-a-vis Europe, how do you see China's behavior? Because it hasn't been militarily, so as to speak, yet, but they are making large inroads in various countries and areas.
Yeah, I'm very concerned actually about what China is doing in Europe. The Belt Road Initiative, of course, is attractive for smaller countries that are seeking development of infrastructure, airports, seaports, rail, tunnels, bridges, this sort of thing. So that's attractive. The problem, of course, the way that China does this, they don't help employment in those countries because they bring in Chinese labor, and they create debt traps that have long-term negative effects for these countries. And then from a strategic standpoint, it also creates a potential problem for the West in that when you've got the Chinese Communist Party sponsored organizations or businesses that have significant control over critical transportation infrastructure, vulnerability for us if we were having to respond to a crisis or to prevent a crisis in Europe, whether that was by design or from an opportunistic standpoint. So those are concerns, and of course the very well known theft of technology that happens across Europe as well as in the United States by the Chinese Communist Party, and then finally the 5G network. Now this is again where I think competition matters. The West should be competing with China instead of constantly threatening our allies. You cannot buy Huawei, for example. We should be competing in a way that Germany, the UK, others have choices. You know, Ericsson and Nokia and Samsung all make 5G networks that are better than what Huawei is able to make. What we can't do is our laws prevent dumping hundreds of millions of dollars or euro into it from the government the way that the Chinese Communist Party is able to do for Huawei. So we've got to figure out a way to compete better there.
Compete better, maybe make it cheaper. You mentioned Germany. Now, I've seen your views on President Trump's announcement of moving troops out or relocating troops from other parts of NATO. You have criticized that in terms of how NATO has dealt with Russia over the decades, right?
So, you know, NATO is not perfect. I mean, any multinational organization is going to have constant tension between the members. But yet the alliance has been the most successful alliance in history because it's always been able to achieve its primary purpose. And when you think about the centuries of warfare between European countries, the fact that every member of NATO has had a war or multiple wars against other members of the alliance, and yet that has stopped since the creation of our alliance. Now, the only actual war that we've had in Europe since the creation of the alliance was during the breakup of former Yugoslavia. And still, NATO was able to contain that. So that alone speaks to the importance and the success of our great alliance. Now, one of the keys, of course, has been the cohesion, the commitment, whether we were the original 12 or now 30, that there was never any doubt that one nation would come to the support of the other. And so I always worry about anything that erodes or challenges the cohesion of the alliance. And so, you know, when the United States indicates, well, maybe we're not so sure about Article 5 for certain countries, or, you know, or we indicate that we're less interested in Europe, and living up to our commitments, that, for me, those are gifts to the Kremlin, especially when the Kremlin has done nothing to warrant, to earn something like that. Secondly, to the specific point of U.S. troops in Germany, first of all, the number of Americans that are in Europe is so small compared to the Cold War days when there were almost 300,000 just in West Germany. Today, there are 30,000 U.S. Army in all of Europe. 30,000 would not come close to filling half of any major football stadium. So we're talking about a very small number of troops. And they are not here to guard or protect Germany. They are forward based to enable us to carry out our strategy. So the air base at Ramstein, the hospital at Landstuhl, the training area at Grafenwehr, the headquarters in Stuttgart and in Wiesbaden. This helps us carry out our policy, our strategy in Europe, Eurasia, Africa, the Middle East. And so I agreed with the administration's approach because the president said it very clearly. This was done to punish Germany. I can guarantee you that probably 80% of the Germans will be happy to see the United States leave, that they will feel no negative effects except for the small communities that are near these American installations. Otherwise, it's not punishment. And then the idea that we would move headquarters and capabilities to Italy and Belgium also shows a lack of strategic forethought, because Belgium is not even a 1% spender. Italy spends less than Germany as well. So it's a political decision, and now they're having to do the strategic analysis. Fortunately, I think the Congress has really woken up to this, and it will take months to plan, years to execute. And my guess is what actually ends up happening will look nothing like what was announced back in July.
Excuse me. General, what are your thoughts on the so-called bad boy of NATO, of Turkey, and how it has relations with Russia? It's buying weapons like India has the S-400s. It has ties in various theaters, whether it's in Syria. Now Nagorno-Karabakh also sees both seemingly at loggerheads. Turkey and NATO, your thoughts, General?
So, first of all, I would never refer to Turkey as the bad boy of NATO. I know some people do that. Particularly, seems like in Paris they like to do that. And obviously in Greece. But when you look at the map, where the Black Sea sits, how important the Black Sea is to the Kremlin, even a brand new lieutenant can see immediately how strategically important Turkey is. I don't want to imagine Turkey not being in NATO. And it's not just to contain the Kremlin's activities from the Black Sea. It's also about Iran. It's also about Islamic extremism. It's about stability for the Caucasus, the Balkans. And I think that while many of the decisions that are made by the current administration in Ankara are mistakes, or wrong-headed, unnecessary. The S-400, of course, is a perfect example, but also some of the things they're doing in the Eastern Mediterranean, their lack of serious pushback on the Kremlin. Despite all that, if we think strategically, if we think long-term, we do not want to lose Turkey from the alliance. I would say it's definitely time for a Turkey USA 2.0. Time to refresh, begin to rebuild trust. I think at the end of the day, Turkey knows that their best economic future is with the West, and they have a lot to gain if NATO would focus more attention on the Black Sea region. This is the real point. Turkey doesn't believe that the rest of Europe really cares that much about the Black Sea, and that many European nations are willing to let the Kremlin sort of have its way there. And without the Black Sea, the Kremlin would not be able to support the Assad regime in Syria. and the Russian support for Assad and the civil war there over the last 7 years or so has not only killed hundreds of thousands of people, it's put millions of refugees on the road into Europe. So, and this was not an accidental outcome. This was intended. What General Breedlove calls the weaponization of refugees, which has had a terrible destabilizing effect in Europe. That would not be possible without Russia's illegal annexation of Crimea. So, and now, of course, they're supporting General Haftar in Libya. So there's probably another million refugees poised to come across the Mediterranean into Europe. Again, this is all by design. So if we think strategically, if you take the Black Sea and put it in the middle of the map, instead of leaving it down at the bottom of the map, which is usually where it is on most NATO and European maps, it's in the bottom right-hand corner. If you move that map a little bit, it will change dramatically how you think about Turkey.
Well, Turkey's geopolitical ambitions or President Erdogan's could be a subject for another topic of discussion. But when you mentioned the S-400s, well, India is also acquiring the S-400s from Russia, and India has also upped its ties across the board, and including military with the U.S., whether it's platforms like the C-17, the C-130, Apache, Chinook, and now talks about the Guardian armed Reaper drone as well. How do you view India-U.S. military ties, General?
Well, first of all, when it comes to arms sales, this is also competition, and you win that competition through quality, through speed of delivery, through price, and through sustainment and support. And I think that while there are challenges to doing things with the United States, the quality is almost always top, and the long-term sustainment is always the best. But the downside is that the United States, regardless of if it's a Republican or a Democrat, the United States likes to use sanctions as a tool for pressure. And so I can understand why nations, for their own sovereign reasons, will make decisions based on those other factors as well. The dependability. How can we be sure that, yes, the Patriot is the best, but can we be sure that the support and the delivery won't be interrupted because of a political or sanctions type issue? So I think India has had to balance their arms purchases because of that, and also I think probably this gives India a sense of some sort of leverage with Russia when it's looking at challenges with China. To counterbalance that, if you're able to have leverage with the Kremlin, again, this is great power competition, and I think that nations have to make decisions at the end of the day that give them the best security. Obviously, I personally believe that in terms of quality and support and sustainment, and also when you start talking about interoperability, these factors matter. Turkey's decision to buy the S-400 is a big mistake, although it's Turkey's choice. It's a mistake because that will never be allowed to integrate into any sort of NATO air and missile defense system. And I'm sure you know, and your readers know, that modern air and missile defense, this is not like in the Second World War where you had, one gun that looked up and would try to hit something. You have sensors and command and control and radar and weapons that may be spread over hundreds of kilometers away from each other, even linked into other nations in order to see the picture. And that's why, the S-400 will never be allowed in that, because the last thing that the alliance would want and that the United States would want would be any sort of software that was buried inside the S-400 to infiltrate and damage NATO's system.
Since you're talking about integration of theaters in the military sphere, your quick thoughts, General, on how modern battlefields have changed. I mean, heard about it, and people like you have been warning about it, or asking people to prepare for it for years and decades. But when you see it around the globe, even in Nagorno-Karabakh, the strength of, say, aerial platforms, unmanned aerial platforms to do damage to ground targets, so aerial, you have underwater drones as well, and probably unmanned vehicles on land. The changing nature of the battlefield generally. Your comments, last words.
Well, of course, unmanned systems, I think, are already playing an increasingly important role, as everybody has watched the strikes happening in Nagorno-Karabakh, in Syria, in Libya, and in Ukraine, and now everybody has drones. I mean, even non-state actors has drones, and you can put a weapon on them. So that we have to adjust to that, and as every time I watched a strike on a tank or Pandar air defense system, it was obvious that the troops on the ground were completely unprepared. I mean, they were so unprotected. And of course, now it's not just the visual, it's the electromagnetic signature that is so easy to detect. So all of us are having to adjust to that. But the backbone, what makes all that possible, of course, is the cyberspace, and so who is able to protect their systems, who's able to find and attack other people's systems, is eventually going to be the winner in any of these conflicts. I think unmanned systems for the Navy is really going to change things. It's so much cheaper. First of all, you don't have to have thousands of crew members or hundreds of crew members. You don't have to have the infrastructure necessary. And of course, they can be underway for much longer periods of time. And so, particularly in anti-submarine warfare, anti-mine warfare, reconnaissance, that this is really going to change things. And I think the United States Navy, working with our allies and friends in the Indo-Pacific region, this will help counter the huge increase in Chinese naval capability.
General Hodges, absolute pleasure. Thank you for your insight, experience, and time.
Thank you for the privilege of speaking with you.
You can get all the latest news and analysis from an Indian perspective on our website. If you support our journalism, you can help us by, again, logging on to Strat News Global. I'm Amitabh Brady.